Now, how about them damn Celtics?
We are back with another How About Them Celtics video. Sam and I are recording Sunday, February 16th. We're talking about the difference between this year's Celtics and last year's Celtics. Shane Young of Forbes put out a graphic on Twitter saying Boston Celtics after 54 games. And obviously, this is a little bit different now because the Celtics have played 55 games, I believe, because they beat the Spurs in the one game after this was posted. So it's a little bit adjusted, but by and large, this is what it is. And he pointed out that the Celtics, after 54 games, actually have a higher net rating and more victories by 20 plus points than they did last year after 54 games. I'll pull up the data a little bit closer so you guys can read it here. I'll read it out, even though this is a video anyway. So everyone who's watching this is actually watching this. Last year to this year, 42-12 last year, 38-16 this year. Celtics had 10 20-plus point victories last year. They have 14 this year. Their offensive rating was 121.4 last year to 120.3 this year. Defensive rating is actually better this year, 112.3 to 110.9. It's just fifth versus third, but that just means more teams have good defenses. Net rating is a plus 9.4 this year, plus 9.1 last year. But again, there's two teams that are better. And then there's a bunch of other stats on the screen that are interesting as well, but not relevant to the difference between the two teams in terms of good versus bad. But it's interesting to see the team presented in this context because I feel like a lot of the discourse is they're a lot worse this year, when in reality they're 4 games behind where they were last year and kind of better. Like realistically, like that's what the stats would tell you. But there's obviously more nuance to discuss.
It's pretty crazy that last year they would still be behind both OKC and Cleveland right now.
That just shows you how dominant their regular seasons have been.
So I think there have been like 3 separate Celtics regular season stretches. There was, of course, the opening, like 16-3, whatever they did at the beginning of the season. They were just dominating teams. It felt like they were making every 3, like probably 9 games out of 10 was like laugh out loud funny how just they did not miss. And these other teams had to like try and be like, can we please get a stop? Like, pretty please. And the Celtics were so much better than everybody. It wasn't even funny. They beat the Cavs in that stretch. Then you had December to February, or December to late January, which was not pretty. The Celtics looked human. They did deal with like on and off injuries of like, oh, Holiday's out. Oh, Jalen is banged up a little bit. Oh, yeah. Hauser on and off, playing, not playing. The season has taken its course on these guys. They were not as good. They were vulnerable. They were losing games, inexplicably losing games. They were so bad in certain situations. They had like 3 worst losses of the season in a row or in a week, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden they're back. They've had their back stretch where they've won 8 out of 9 now. They've rolled teams going to the All-Star break. And like, if you showed me, let's just say like the first 2 stretches were put together. It was one big stretch, and then you just slid the bad stretch to last. I wouldn't believe you. I would look at this and be like, I don't believe you. But with them finding their footing in the last couple weeks, what is on the screen right now feels a lot more tangible. It feels very real. It feels like you can understand this and feel like you've seen it in watching these games.
Excuse me. Sorry, I had to cough at a bad time. I 100% agree. And the other part I'll say to this is we've done a bunch of I hate the Celtics defensive strategy discussion. And I stand on that. I was in,
Me
or
too.
not in, but I get it. I still get it, but I disagree with it. I'm curious. I'm going to look right now. How many of their losses have come as a result of that strategy failing? And when you look at the overall stats, which is probably what Joe Mazzulla is looking at, it's like, all right, well, those are literally just flukes in our system, or not flukes, but like that's going to happen every once in a while. But by and large, we're still an 80% roughly win team. Like the Pacers game way earlier in the season was an overtime loss by 3. Close game, tough one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Warriors lost November 6th. It's a while look back, but I think that was just a tough loss. I think that can be one, chalk it up to generic loss. Atlanta lost bad, right? Atlanta lost, no hustle, obviously lost by 1, but another 1-point loss, right? So the Celtics have lost by a cumulative through their first 3 losses, 9 points through their first 3 losses. 4-point loss to Cleveland. 6-point loss to Memphis when Drew Holiday has maybe his worst shooting performance ever, right? Then Chicago lost really bad, lost by 9. We're up in that game. That's a rough one. Magic lost by 4. Philadelphia lost by 4. Indiana lost by 9. That was another rough one. OKC was a tough one. Raptors was bad, but only 3. Atlanta 4 in overtime. Got killed by the Lakers, obviously. 2-point loss, 7-point. Like, they're not losing by a lot. Like, when the Celtics lose, it is literally just you're failing on some of those margins. Other guys are hot, or like a fluke things happens, or like it just feels like when you take the whole season under context, they're still playing very similar basketball to what they were last year. And it doesn't feel like that at times because, like you said, there was that stretch where almost all of their losses came in and started to pile up. But realistically, like they've at this point last season, they had only lost 4 more games. And out of how many of the losses that I say were either overtime or a 1-point loss that came down to the final shot, like if 4 more of those go in their favor, the Celtics are in the same exact position they were last year when they had a historical season. So I just think there's a lot of important context that needs to be had here. And I think the purpose of this graphic that Shane Young, again, of Forbes, put together is they're fine. And like you said, the fact that they have come around from their rough stretch in the middle is only like the perfect sandwich to reinforce that observation.
Shit sandwich, shit in the middle.
Exactly.
Uh, also with this graph, with what you said, with the close losses, right? The close losses make it sting more, I think. I think, like, those sit with people more. If you just show up and you get shit on one day, which is I don't really think it happened to them last year either, but if it happens, it's just like, you're just like, "Ah, what are you gonna do?" Like, one of those days. But when you like, I'll always go back to the Hawks game because it's just burned into my brain. But, like, you have a loss like that, and you're just like, "Wow, they were right at the finish line. They couldn't finish the game." And then those start to pile up, like, you lose to the Kings because you don't really show up in the 4th quarter. The Thunder loss wasn't like a light the bridge on fire loss, but it was like, damn, like, they really had nothing going in the 4th quarter and got outplayed. When you're feeling like you're getting that consistently, it makes you worry about the playoffs. It was a discussion Jack, me, everybody that was behind a microphone wearing green for the last, like, 4 seasons was like, "Can these guys play in the clutch last year?" Like, we were talking about it quite a bit. And it was like, well, they just don't ever have to. Like, they're just nasty. And then they showed up in the playoffs against the Pacers and closed out all the close games and did a great job. And then they won a championship because of it. They closed out game 3 in Dallas, same way. Game 2 at the Garden got kind of tight, closed it out. This year, I think we've seen a little bit more of that recently. Holding on, bending without breaking was a real trend last year. We've seen it now. The Cavs game was a great example of that, where like they just built this huge lead. Cleveland made an effort. They had the momentum at home. They had the crowd into it, and the Celtics kind of put the brakes on them and was like, okay, like you guys had your fun. Game's over now. Going to take over, end it. We are seeing flashes of the last season's team. And like it is unfair to be like, how do they stack up? Like, they're not as good as last year's team. Ultimately, the results of the playoffs will determine of whether or not we care. Because if they win another championship, who cares? Doesn't matter. Doesn't They could have been the 8th seed if they win a championship. For all I
Exactly.
care.
Exactly. And I think Joe Mazzulla said it in a press conference too, like a lot of the discourse around the Celtics is being driven by the fact that there are 2 teams having ridiculously good seasons, like top 10, top 15 all-time seasons in the same year. And so instead of being like usually 38-16 is probably like close to the best record in the NBA. But the Cavs and Thunder have both lost 10 games, which is better than what the Celtics were last year when everyone was talking when they won the East by 14 games. Like that is how crazy their seasons have been this year. So all in all, I'm not worried. I don't think I was worried before this graphic, but I think this graphic gives some important context as
Now you're
to
worried.
they're the same. No, exactly, right? No, but
Like, oh, I don't know.
they're the same. Like the Celtics are performing very, very similar to last year. They're winning by more often. Their defense is better this year, which is not something I would have thought, but by the numbers, like it's showing that. And obviously, this is how this kind of dominant stretch to end last year too. So we'll have to see if they can replicate that. But let us know what you think in the comments. I'm not worried. I think this is some good context that's important for the fans who might be in a place where they're not panicking, but like a little bit shaky on this year's team versus last year's team because they're the same. They're pretty similar. But appreciate y'all for tuning in. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and all that same. Take it out.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening and watching. Make sure you leave a like, comment, tell us what you think of, well, the Celtics. Tell us what you think. You can subscribe and hit the bell too. Jack and I are here putting out new videos every single morning. Full pods drop Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday. Game recaps drop the morning after each game. Other videos like this one are on the channel in between to keep you up to date with all things Celtics. You can also find Jack and I streaming pregame live for a half hour before each game. It's a ton of fun. Come hang out with the chat. Great group of people. It's half hour before every single game. You can also find the two of us on Spotify and Apple. All pods and recaps are up there. So if you just want the audio, that's fine. Go ahead, follow us. They'll go right to your feed. And leave a 5-star review. We'd appreciate that very, very much. It does help us in the algorithm. You can email us, hbtcpod@gmail.com. We're reading your emails every single time we do a pod. So actually later today, get them in. Get them in now. hbtcpod@gmail.com. The socials are at How About Them C's for Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook's the name of the pod. All streams are there. They're on YouTube. They're on Twitter. Jack's Twitter's Jackson NBA. Mine's at Sam LaFrance NBA. That's it for us. Bye.
Tic-tac-toe.